Good evening and welcome to the Bridgewater Township Planning Board. Regular meeting for Tuesday, March 19th, 2024. Adequate notice of this meeting has been given in accordance with the Open Public Meetings Act, NJSA 10:4-6. On February 7th, proper notice was sent to the Courier News and the Star Ledger and filed with the clerk at the Township of Bridgewater and posted on the bulletin board in the municipal building. Please be aware of the Planning Board policy for public hearings. No new applications will be heard after 9:30 p.m., and no new testimony will be taken after 10 p.m. Hearing assistance is available upon request. Accommodation will be made for individuals with a disability pursuant to the Americans with Disabilities Act, or ADA, provided the individual with a disability provides 48 hours advance notice to the Planning Department Secretary before the public meeting. However, if the individual should require special equipment or services, such as a CART transcriber, 7 days advance notice, excluding weekends and holidays, may be necessary. I'd ask everyone please to rise to salute the flag. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. Ms. Probst, could I have a roll call, please? Here.
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 Yes.
Here.
Thank you, Nancy. I'd like to make a quick note before we proceed. Ashley Sikora was not at the prior meeting at the reorganization. However, she was sworn in before this evening's meeting. We can move along. We do have some minutes for review this evening for February 6, 2024. Are there any questions or comments for the record for this set of minutes?
Hearing none, I'll move the minutes of February 6th.
It's Councilman Kirsch. Could I have a second, please?
I'll second.
Mr. Magora, could I have a roll call, please? Yes.
Yes.
Here.
Yes.
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 Moving along, just another notice here. At our reorganization in January, the board did not designate a planner at that time. However, every member of the board should have a resolution in front of them. I'd like to make a motion, or I'd need a motion, to adopt Catherine Sarmad as our board planner and to adopt a resolution memorializing her appointment.
I'll make both motions.
That's Ms. Sikora. Could I have a second, please?
I second it.
Mr. Chowdhury, could I have a roll call, please? Yes.
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 Yes, please.
Yes.
Welcome, Ms. Sarman. Moving along, we do have a courtesy review this evening. It's the Bridgewater-Raritan Regional School District. It's the district referendum project, a high school field house site improvement. Please. That would be on April 2nd, I believe. Right. Very good. An announcement that if you're here for Hidden River Farms, that will be carried to April 2nd without further notice. Good evening. Who will be representing the Bridgewater Regional High School District this evening?
Good evening. I'm Alexis Goldman from Solutions Architecture, and Keith Smith from French and Prillo Engineers. Are you okay if we move forward?
Yes, we are.
Okay. So we're here tonight to give you a bit of an update, an overall explanation of the improvements planned for 700 Garrettson Road across the street at the field house in and around that area. So we'll just give you, so I have some, I guess you can see this on the screen. We just did some colored imagery for you to look at. It's the exact same information that was already in the packets that you were provided, just a color version to make it a little easier for us to present. So just giving you a general overview. On the first screen, you can see, oops, sorry, I'll go back. This is the overall area. And so everything you see in colored is the area that we are working on in this project for the Bridgewater Raritan Regional School District. It includes repaving the entire front parking lot that's along Garrettson Road and a little bit to around the corner towards Commons Way. That's all currently student parking, and it will remain student parking. It's just, you know, being repaved and slightly reorganized. I'm so sorry. It's okay. Unplug you really quickly and plug you back in on their screen. On their screen. Okay. No problem. Touch your left technology.
They usually work.
I just didn't know if it was affecting anything.
You know, in the interest of time, if what you're showing is any of the pages in this packet, and you want to just tell us which image that is,
Yeah, if you go to the, oh, I'm sorry, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but the overall, should be an overall site plan. I don't have that full set in front of me. But maybe you could, can you see those screens slightly? At least you'll know the area we're talking about.
Would you reference perhaps the drawing number of the plans?
Let me just, can I see? No. You got C5?
C5.0,
Yes.
it's close. It's not exactly what you're showing, but it's close enough.
There's, yeah, we have, the other one is the enlarged area too, so they should be.
That's the
both.
one we have.
Okay.
C5.
Okay. So I'll just keep going and then if you have any questions. So, covering paving in the front parking lot and around the bend for the students, and also looking at walkways around the entire area, which completes access around the entire existing field house and all the way down to the stream before we switch over to the area where the high school is. We're adding a restroom building to the right on the plan, page right, of the existing building. That replaces the current porta-johns that are there, and the inside of the building, we're changing to provide some offices where there were currently bathrooms. And then we relocate the entire main entrance to the field for major events between the existing building and the new toilet building. So you'll see there this new plaza area entrance, and that comes all the way around to the back and provides access to the bleachers and to the fields, as they currently do. And everything that we've done on either side of the building is ADA accessible, so you can have ADA access on either left or right side of the building that takes you to the bleachers. There's basically new paved areas all around the entire field house. Some are concrete areas, some pavers. We've reused there are engraved brick pavers in the rear, so we've relocated those in the layout to maintain those, and we've added additional plantings to add a little bit more shade to the area because it is quite wide open. And then the pathways go all the way down to the bleachers, and we are also replacing the home bleachers this summer as well. And I'll let Keith, maybe you want to cover a little bit more detail about the site here.
Yes, so in general, the idea, as Alexis had mentioned, was to relocate the main entrance for the facility so that it's a clean shot past the building through to the stands and to the concession area. The area to the rear has been redressed between some concrete scoring and some pavers. We're also bringing you into what will be an area for the Barcelona Monument, which is to be restored in that location. The entrance from the parking lot will be lit and inviting to bring you into the site. As Alexis had mentioned, the areas all around have been made ADA accessible at this time. We do have some steps where they're not accessible. We've maintained the access for service vehicles to service the area and bring equipment in. The walkways going to the ball field area have been slightly modified, and the reason for that was there's only a walkway between the dugout and the backstop, so if a game was going, you would have to walk in front of the dugout in order to go to the high school. So we've created somewhat of a loop road around the back of the dugout for that period of time. I'm sure that during other times that gates will be open and it'll just continue as it does now. You'll walk straight through. The area by the grandstands has been adjusted to provide for some storage under the grandstands, as well as the ramping and better configuration of the grandstands, and also of the press box, which will be located at the grandstand area. There have been some drainage improvements that we've done. A lot of the areas are typically wet, so we've added in a little bit of stormwater piping and smaller inlets to allow for that area to drain more efficiently. And again, as Alexa indicated, the parking area is being completely reconfigured. Well, it's basically being reconstructed and restriped as part of the project. There are no new, really, it's mostly reconstruction. It's not as though we're adding new parking there. We're just reconfiguring what is already there to provide for a better flow. On the one portion of the parking, we've created a loop road for the students, so they have to come out basically to the main exit and go to the light to better control the traffic within the parking lot itself.
And just a little bit, the toilet building has eight toilet, sorry about that. The toilet building has 8 toilet stalls and 3 sinks in each side, men's and women's. So a lot more than what is currently being provided, and that should help with the flow and for events. The images you can see on the screen, and they're also in the handout towards the back, are the renderings of what the building would look like. We're using CMU block to match a little bit of the design of the current buildings that are there. And it's a low slope roof, and the drains from the roof will connect to the underground system, the storage system that's existing, and we're expanding. So the water will not be draining onto the new plaza. And we're adding basically a new marquee entrance sign that you can see in some of those renderings. So basically, this view that's on the screen is the view when you park your car and you're walking into the approach, entrance into the fields. There isn't a ticket window per se. The school district is now doing ticketing through an online app, so there'll be somebody there just checking that, scanning that in. At the front, at that gate there, there's gates that close for, safety when there's not an event happening. Also bollards, as you can see in the image, again, to protect the pedestrians in this area since it's quite wide. So this is just a closer up view at the entrance area. And we'll be adding some graphics on the existing building since there's, not a lot going on with the facade of that building. We figured on a simple and cost-effective way to improve the facade a bit. So that's what you see in that imagery. Again, this is just a closer up view of that graphics and the entrance and the piers. So this is as you walk through that plaza and you've now passed the toilet building on one side. This is a monument area, Basilone Monument area that we've created. I don't know, I'm pretty sure that you're all aware that the school district was donated a monument from Newark. So we've created a little area and some seat walls with some lighting to highlight that monument there. And that also helps to create, to the right of that image, you can see a nice seating area for people outside of the concession area. And this is just a view of the concession area. We're not necessarily changing anything except we are repainting the exterior of the building. The roofing is getting improved and replaced, so some of the roofing, the coping around the edge will be improved. And a view looking in the back. The back doesn't change as much, but the paving areas get much, much wider so that during events, people aren't just all congested into a smaller section. So that's all the new paving sections towards the back. And this is to the right of the building. So if you're in the parking lot on the right side, this is where there's a big slope down. So we added some stairs to make this a safer condition. There's just a big slope there right now. And that's basically the overview. Let's see if I cover everything. I think that's it.
Perhaps we could open up to the board for any questioning?
Sure.
Please.
Oh, I'm sorry. I just wanted to answer a couple of questions that we saw in the commentary we had received. The drawings that you have list a whole bunch of alternates, and there's all bubbles and section on the sections. Those are basically because we needed to, for the purposes of bidding, we needed to separate some of the areas to get different costs because some of the areas were being paid for out of different funds. So where you see alternate bid, almost everything, actually everything that you see on the drawings was accepted and will be completed. It's just, that's why it's listed as alternate bid. And I think there was commentary about EV charging. Keith, did you want to comment on that?
Yes, again, this is not new parking. It's basically reconfiguring the parking that's there. So as we understand it, the EV parking would not be required for this.
Thank you. I'll start on that note. I do have a couple questions myself. My first question, what you just answered, whether or not there's going to be electric vehicle parking. Would there be the preparation for electric vehicle parking in the future? Would the groundwork be laid for that?
There is conduit under the parking. We did that for the potential for future lighting if it was ever needed, and we didn't want to have to obviously rip up the parking lot at a later date. So there is conduit under the lot. We haven't necessarily planned spots for EV parking. It's student parking, so it would become incredibly complicated to manage that. So it really hasn't become, a thought process for the school district.
Okay. I've been there a few times myself. So you're saying the parking lot essentially is going to remain with as many spaces as it has today.
Yes.
The plans mentioned something about storm swales being added on the interior of the parking lot. Could you potentially reference on which drawing that would be so that we could see for the board? Is it existing? Are those storm swales existing at
Yes,
this time?
they're the swales that are there, we're maintaining those same vegetated swales that, take the stormwater. However, what we are proposing at this time is to line them with a low-flow channel, because what happens is as the waters, and we're placing new head walls basically at the end of each pipe. We're going to channel the water into the pipes. What happens today and has been for a while is that as the water gets from one swale to the other and tries to get into the pipe, it scours out the soil and it deposits further down, so it's not efficiently flowing through there, and water is sitting there all the time. So the idea at this point is to line the channels just on the very center at the bottom with a low flow, basically a sidewalk, that the water can continue down. It'll eliminate the need for continuous cleaning of the soil and sediment that gets deposited there.
And the toilet area, the restroom building, that's going to be a new construction, correct? Okay. Will the swales be adequately sized to accept that impervious coverage?
Yes, basically, it's going where the pavement is now.
Okay.
So and there's an existing stormwater system, and we are extending that to pick up roof drains.
Last question about the restrooms. What's the current situation with restrooms at the site today?
Today, there's right on that side of the building, there's toilets that are available, that are accessible from the exterior, and there's additional porta potties that are outside. So those are currently used together to support the amount of people at this current time.
Okay. And as far as the accessibility goes for the future site, would that be accessible to the general public or only during events?
Well, nothing in the functions of the property would change. Whatever the current conditions are would stay exactly the same.
Okay. That's all I have for now. Thank you.
I think it's only available during events or when the school is using it for practice. I'm really glad that you're adding, been many games at that stadium, so adding restrooms that are more adequate is great.
Thank you, Ms.
If I go back to the parking for one moment, the exit at Commons Way, students aren't allowed to turn in there, get into school. Is that going to be changed under this plan? Are those signs going to be altered, or?
Entrance, no, that's not going to, as far as I understand it, that's not going to change.
Well, what we have done on that Commons Way portion is there is going to be a fence there, which will, and we've modified the circulation through there to make it a loop, so that the students won't be cutting through the transportation building to get to Commons Way. We'll have to turn around within the parking lot and exit at and come to the light in order to make the right turn there.
Right, so right now, if you can see what I'm circling there, so the students won't be able to pass that anymore.
So they won't be able to exit through there either? Okay.
Because they won't be able to get to the lot.
So that whole portion south of where the green starts, that's all going to be cut off for parking for students?
This is all currently working now, it's just, it's not quite clear who's supposed to be using that now.
Okay.
I think this bus parking goes to where right now?
Probably to the limit of the parking. We're adding a few bus spaces in there.
Right, so right now, this is where the lot stops at the bend. So we're basically pulling that back to provide a little bit of bus parking.
Okay, because I know at some point where it extends south, that parking is extended as well. I want to know where the line would be drawn.
Right, so it's being drawn a few spots above, basically losing a few of the spots from where it is right now.
Okay.
Because they needed a few more bus parking. But it'll be separated now, so it won't be as, right now it's a little confusing who's supposed to be where, because there's no defined, separation, but now it will be clearly defined where the student parking ends and the
Plus,
maintenance
both
ends.
lanes would go in the same direction at this point, which would lead you to Common Way. So in this case, again, we are securing that area with a fence and a gate at the end of the fence so that there can be access if necessary. But the students that enter on the one side will circulate around looking for a spot and then exit through the parking lot.
I have a question on parking on this. The CCTV camera will be on a parking, or there'll be no CCTV camera on parking?
They do currently have cameras, so we're not planning to change any of the cameras.
Okay, I see, whenever I come from that road in the evening, there is no activity, but there are a few cars always there with their lights on. I know they are not the school cars, at least, so that's why I'm asking you. So, somebody monitors the parking lot anytime?
I don't necessarily have that answer. If you, some of the board members and the superintendent's here if you need them to answer it, but I don't have that information.
Okay, thank you. Yes, yeah.
Ask him to come to the microphone.
Could you please come to the podium, please?
We are also broadcasting, so it's not just being able to be heard in this room.
Okay, thank you. So to answer your question, as far as is anyone monitoring the parking lot, we have cameras in the area, so that's monitored, but at a certain point in time, so we know the school closes, activities are done, et cetera, and then it's really just the Bridgewater Police who,
Yeah, right.
on their
Police-
patrols, are going through there.
Yeah, I see a couple of days actually, police goes there to talk to them for something, but and nevertheless, it is police just monitor it. Yes. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And for those of us that aren't familiar with who you are, if you could just please state your name and address.
My name is Robert Beers, Superintendent of Schools at Bridgewater Raritan.
Thank you for the record.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bear.
Mr. Chairman, 2 questions, if I may.
Councilman Sure.
One is the anticipated timing of this construction.
The contractor has submitted drawings to the planning board, to the building department for review, and they're planning to start site work shortly. They're prepping and ordering materials and getting ready to start that. So they will be starting around April with the site work and some building work related to that, and hopefully the schedules for them to be finished by the time football season starts.
I thought that was the answer, but you never know. And second, just want to make sure, I don't know if this may be a question for our staff or for our attorney. Under application fees, escrow is current, so our staff is being compensated for their review, correct?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Mr. Magura.
Okay, we're dealing with kids at a high school, right? And I see plans for a skateboard barrier. How about some plans for bicycle locks, for electric scooters, things that school kids might use to access the field?
Bicycle racks is a good suggestion. I do think there are bicycle racks now, but we're not really necessarily designating a spot for it, but we can look at that.
I was just thinking about that we're dealing with kids and how they get there is different than how I would get there, since you've got the scooter barriers, or the skateboard barriers.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, if I may. Regarding the parking lot renovations, when is that expected to happen?
Again, same timeline, but they probably won't do the paving of the parking lot until the very end of the summer, until they're done bringing large materials in so that they don't ruin it once, they'll deal with the toilet building first, basically.
And then for
Then finish it.
those individuals that can be parked there for like the summer sessions and everything, where are they going to be parking?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that one.
Like, so if there's like summer programs for like football and whatnot, where are they going to be parking?
Yeah, summer parking, for the first part of the summer might be okay, but probably for all of August, that area will be off limits. The gravel section,
Are
that's,
they going to be encouraged to park somewhere else then, is my question.
we've sort of come up with temporary paths for pedestrians. We haven't gotten exactly that far on temporary locations for cars during that time, but we'll obviously have to figure something out. The area that's gravel, that's close to the stream, obviously can still be used during that time. So that's one area for sure. If it needs to be beyond that, we'll probably have to, or they'll have to park in the solar lot and walk.
That's expected to
Again, it's just
last.
for the month of August, really.
For the month of August?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Perhaps some questions from our board professionals.
I had indicated in the joint memo with Mr. Burr's office, Mr. Wisniewski's office, dated March 14th, just a question raised on sheet C1.1. There's a bubble around the lower portion of the parking lot, the southeast portion, where the Office for Buildings and Ground Transportation's located, but I wasn't sure if there actually were any changes to that portion of the site.
No, I noticed that on the drawings. That is confusing. No, the only areas on Commons Way that are being affected is that parking area that we discussed. There's no work in this project around building and grounds.
Okay, just wanted to clarify that. And then the only other thing that wasn't included in the memo is there a calculation, or do you know if there's a net change in the impervious coverage as a result of the modifications to the pavement, the walkways around the building?
I don't have, like, any specific numbers calculated for that, but the changes are generally de minimis. I mean, we're going from probably, some areas are a little bit larger now, which are being reconfigured and moved to other areas. The area that is currently the driveway is being removed and replaced with the pavers. So it's really pretty much in kind. We're not expanding to an true extent.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Wisniewski?
Currently, the swale along the front that extends all the way down is, acts to a certain extent as detention, because each of the segments fills up with water as it goes to the next segment. The remaining portion of the improvements really are all just upgrades to what's there. The roof drains currently go below grade and into the system. That's continuing. The only other storm drains that's being proposed is in areas that are currently swales, and the intent is simply to remove or help to dry up the swales a little bit. I'm using combination type pipes, so it's a little bit different. That's your regular pipe, but it's perforated with stone around it, so in periods of non-rain, it'll keep that area drier, so when you do get rain, it's not going to get wet inside. No. No, everything basically works towards the swales, and then from the swales to the stream.
Thank you. I had a general question. I noticed that the main asphalt walkway going into the complex between the ball fields and the building site is going to be expanded to about 12 feet, I think, from existing 6 feet. I read that right?
Yeah, that's actually, the main entrance is 30 feet.
Over there.
Oh, okay, this section here?
Yeah, right.
Yes, that's 12 feet.
Okay.
It's not, it's uneven paving, but it's like 8 to 10 feet now, I think.
Okay, so it's,
So we're trying to expand it so that vehicles are going to be able to go past without
If you have a
constantly-
service vehicle, you need to
Understood.
be able to open up the gates and drive along that.
a golf cart, that type of thing, or even an ambulance if necessary, okay. And how about the general walkway that goes back to the school area? I think there's one that extends to the school.
Yeah, the width we're not changing there.
Okay. Okay.
It's just in poor condition, so we're just reconstructing.
The only other question I had was, the board received a memo from our director of sewer utility. I'm not sure if you had a chance to review that memo or not. Okay. There's several comments that he did propose on there, and some of them were quite detailed in terms of sewage. He wanted to know essentially if the laterals were going to be inspected with closed-circuit television, that type of thing. So would it be possible to potentially speak with the planning office to discuss these plans? Because there's quite a few recommendations that he had in his review.
Fine, our office has been in touch with the sewer department because we want to, obviously make the connection. What is occurring now is there's, I believe, a belly in the pipe, so it's not functioning that well, and we're connecting the new bathrooms to it, so it's a new line. And we're making that connection, and we've been speaking to them about what they need. I haven't seen that memo, though, but we can certainly make any of those adjustments, and the line was televised already to determine its condition.
Very good. And as for the board, are there any comments or questions regarding Mr. Genova's memo?
No, but just for clarification for the public and the applicant, just to pick out a couple of them for flavor. Number 2, notes need to be added to the drawing specifying that the sewer utility be notified 72 hours prior to connection being made to the existing sanitary sewer and/or manholes to schedule required inspections. And I'll just read one more in the interest of time. Number 3, note need to be added to the drawing specifying that the sewer utility requires that sanitary sewer service lateral pass a leakage test, I think that was what you were referring to, performed in accordance with Code Enforcement Department requirements following completion of all site grading. I mean, essentially, he wants to make sure that you end up with a working facility.
The specifications, the testing of the facility itself.
Any other questions? All right, hearing none, at this time, I'd like to open up to any members of the public that have any comments regarding the testimony just heard. Hearing none, seeing none, I will close the public portion of this application. I'll open up for deliberations. Given that this is a courtesy review, I think we're going to have each member of the board essentially give their thoughts and their comments on the testimony just heard this evening.
Actually, even Mr. Chairman, with your indulgence, even before we go there, can we have maybe our legal counsel just remind us what is at stake here and what action essentially will occur as part of a courtesy review?
So yes, as a courtesy review, the district is coming before you, and this board's approval is not necessary. No formal action will be taken. Any comments or conditions that a member or the board has regarding this application may be placed in a letter and submitted to the district, which they may consider following this hearing or this meeting. So again, no formal action or resolution will be required from this board. No approval or vote will be had.
Very good. Given that there is no vote, is this still appropriate for a deliberative session?
Yes, the board may discuss what they just heard, as well as discuss any possible comments they would like to submit to the Board of Education.
Mr. Magora, any comments?
Except for my minor comments, I have no objection.
Mr. Wang?
I think the field house needs some renovation, and the plan looks beautiful to me, and thank you.
Ms. Chartowitz?
I am fine with it. I agree. I think that it's a good addition because more bathrooms were needed.
Mr. Chowdhury?
Yeah, I just want to make sure that at least you get this memo from Mr. Zenova. And there's a 10 action item. Please kindly look at it. And rest of the things are okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Atkins?
Some bathroom renovations were definitely needed, so I think it's a good improvement there, but as long as the flow of traffic on Garrettson and Commons isn't impacted, I think it looks good.
Mr. Banga?
Echoing the comments, welcome changes. No comment.
Ms. Sikora?
I'm excited. I think this looks great, and my kids will enjoy it themselves as they go through the school district too. So Great job. The bathrooms, I echo, definitely needed.
Councilman Kirsch.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate what was discussed and said about this memo from Mr. Genova. You know, the underlying purpose is to make sure that you end up with functioning facilities, which I know is in everybody's best interest. You know, there are some requirements and things in here, and I think if we could just make sure that in any commentary that our strong desire that the items mentioned in this memo be addressed, and if there are any follow-up questions, certainly bringing them to Mr. Genova's attention.
Thank you, Councilman. And I would echo each and every one of the comments just heard, and I'd like to add the addition that I appreciate the addition to landscaping as well. So it's a welcome change, welcome to the township, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to the land development applications for this evening. We do have AR Bridgewater 2 LLC this evening for an extension of preliminary and final major site plan with bulk variances, and he'll be representing this evening.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman. Nicole Dory from Connell Foley on behalf of the applicant AR Bridgewater 2 LLC.
Welcome back, Ms. Story.
Thank you. So this is an application for an extension. We submitted a letter to the board dated February 9th, 2024, explaining the basis for the extension. This is the third statutory extension request for the application, and this is a bit of an unusual extension request. It's in furtherance of settlement. So that's the reason. All the steps for the settlement have not yet been completed. We expect them to be completed this year, and this is the final extension request, and it's for that reason.
Story, I understand there's some delays in construction, which necessitated the request for the approval. Would it be possible to potentially put on record some of the reasons for the delay, some of the processes that have to take place throughout the rest of the year?
Yes, well, actually, as I was mentioning, this is a bit of an unusual request for an extension because it's related to a prior site plan application. As many of you on the board might be familiar, there was a prior approval for this project for a mixed-use development. So as part of a settlement with the township and the board, there was an alternative project approved, and that happened last year. So this is actually an extension of the prior site plan approval where all of the steps for the settlement related to the alternative project are completed. And we're actually nearing the expiration of some of the appeal periods for the actions. You might remember recently this board actually adopted an amendment to a settlement agreement related to this. So because the appeal periods for all of those events have not yet expired prior to February 25th of this year, which was when the original resolution was adopted on February 25th, 2020. We're asking for extensions related to that, but it's in furtherance of settlement, and this project that we're asking for an extension for, assuming this all goes as it should within the next couple of months, that approval would actually be terminated. So it's a bit of an interim extension to allow these settlement steps to be completed.
Thank you, Ms. Story. Are there any questions from our members of the board regarding the extension request? No. Any questions from our professionals?
I would just note that the review comments include that the recommendation that the resolution reaffirm all the representations made during the prior public hearings and the approval, despite whatever the outcome is going to be from the settlement, to protect the board, all of those prior commitments and representations be held and just make their way into the resolution.
Certainly.
Thank you. Any other questions? Any questions from the members of the public? Seeing none, any further comments? Ms. Svina, what's the type of motion that we would need?
Just a motion to grant the extension request.
Who would like to make that motion?
I'll make that motion.
Mr. Banga?
I'll second.
Ms. Sikora? Have a roll call, please. Yes.
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 Thank you, Ms. Story. Have a good evening. Thank you. Okay, moving along, we do have another application this evening. That's for Dr. Bradley McAdam, 794 Route 202 North. I believe that's McAdam Chiropractor that's there currently. Who is representing them this evening?
Good evening, Mr. Chairman. My name is Michael Sobert. I'm from the law firm D. Francesco Bateman, located in Warren Township, New Jersey.
Good evening, Mr. Solbert. How are you?
Doing great. Happy to be here. Okay.
We're happy to have you.
So, I have the privilege. First off, let me start off by congratulating Ms. Sarmad as getting appointed as the board planner. I've had the wonderful experience working with Ms. Doyle the past 3 years. She's taught me a lot, but looking forward to working with you, Catherine. So, I have the privilege of representing Dr. Bradley McAdam this evening. The purpose of this application is to request the removal of a condition from a prior approval concerning the property located at Block 549, Lot 9, more commonly known as 794 Route 202 North. The property is located in the township's R40A professional zone. So you have to go back to October 12th, 1999, when this board granted preliminary and final site plan approval with variances to Dr. McAdam. The approval allowed for the conversion of a single-family dwelling into office space and the construction of an addition to the existing premises, enabling Dr. McAdam to establish his successful chiropractic practice on the property. Condition number 6 of the resolution of approval required that, and I quote, "The applicant shall prepare a deed restriction limiting the use of the existing structure to general office uses only, confirming that medical and dental uses are strictly prohibited," end quote. So, the reason for the board's imposition of this condition, as will be testified to later this evening by Dr. McAdam, was to address the board's concerns with parking on the property. In fact, again, as Dr. McAdam will attest to later tonight, he had to undertake significant site improvements, which improvements ultimately violated the township's lot coverage requirements in order to provide sufficient parking on the property under the 1999 township parking requirements. Dr. McAdam was required to provide 15 parking spaces for approximately 1,500 square feet of medical office space, plus 4 additional spaces per doctor. That totaled 19 spaces. The remaining approximately 1,000 square feet of the premises was deed restricted to be available only for general office space, which I classified as an affirmative deed restriction or an affirmative obligation to have a certain use rather than just to refrain from a use. So why was this deed restriction put into place? So the property back in 1999 could not accommodate an additional 1,000 square feet of medical space, as this would have required Dr. McAdam to provide approximately 10 additional parking spaces on the property, which would have brought the total parking on the property to approximately 30 parking spaces. This, of course, would have resulted in an even greater lot coverage violation for a lot that is undersized. Furthermore, I think that the board can appreciate that the township's R40A professional zone district and the immediate surrounding area has become increasingly more commercialized over the past decade, which is something that Dr. McAdam can speak to. So another point I'd like to bring to the board's attention is that the condition number 6, did not establish what I consider to be a standard restriction. So as I mentioned earlier, typically when a deed restriction is recorded, individuals agree to refrain from certain uses on their property. So here, the board imposed what I classified as an affirmative deed restriction, stipulating that any additional space on the premises can only be used as general office space. So what if Dr. McAdam or a future property owner wishes to have a use on the property that is neither medical nor of general office use? What options does that property owner have based upon the imposition of this condition? So this condition mandates that Dr. McAdam can only have general office space, and this affirmative obligation, if you actually look at the text of the resolution, if you look at the whereas clauses, it's not supported, meaning that the condition seems to be different from the whereas clauses and what, again, Dr. McAdam will testify to, what he understood the actual restriction to mean back in 1999. So obviously, it's 2024. We're here before the board 25 years later, approximately. Why now? So since 1999, the township has amended its ordinance where 23 parking spaces are no longer required for the chiropractic and office uses. The parking requirements for these uses, as outlined in our application and as confirmed in Mr. Mad's and Mr. Burr's joint report dated March 14th, 2024, confirmed that it would be 10 parking spaces, or approximately 10 spaces. I think it said 10.1. Just so the record's clear, I did receive 2 reports, but I think that they're essentially the same. It's just that the more recent one, the March 14th report, clarified that it was a joint report. So anyway, the property is now overparked by approximately 14 spaces. And even if the property were to consist entirely of medical office space, for example, it would still be overparked by approximately 13 spaces under the current township's parking standards. So clearly the purpose of this application is to seek approval from the board to eliminate and remove this condition in its entirety that was set forth in the 1999 resolution of approval. We are asking the board to remove this condition since it's our position that the original rationale behind the board's imposition of this condition is no longer pertinent, given the updated parking requirements. So before I call my first and only witness, there's one more item I wish to address before the board. So I've had the privilege over the past couple of years appearing a number of times before the zoning board, probably 24 times. So, and I try to always be upfront and give more information than less information. So in my application, as a gesture of transparency, I did indicate that the application, that should this application tonight be approved, that ultimately Dr. McAdam will go through the appropriate legal process to lease the remaining portion of the building to what we've characterized as a med spa tenant. But what I want to highlight is that this reputation was just made so as to not hide the ball from the applicant's future intentions. I just want to be clear that the med spa use itself is not the subject matter of the application before the board this evening, and that Dr. McAdam will use every appropriate legal avenue to pursue this change in tenancy, assuming that this prospective tenant that I identified many, many weeks ago is still viable. So just to be clear, there have been no zoning permit applications submitted at this time to the township zoning officer, no use variance application submitted to the zoning board, and probably, perhaps most importantly, in the context of this hearing, the applicant has not sought an interpretation of the township's ordinance under Section 70B of the MLUL, and that interpretation power is expressly reserved for the township zoning board of adjustment. So for purposes of tonight's hearing, while I hope that the board appreciates our transparency, I would ask respectfully that the board focus on whether it would be appropriate to remove the condition from the original 1999 approval, irrespective of the future potential use of the property. I had the opportunity to speak with Mr. Peck before tonight's hearing, and we both agreed that the board's main focus, since it appears that this condition was most likely imposed as a condition connected to the variance relief granted back many years ago, that the board should focus on whether the removal of the condition would somehow result in substantial detriment to the public good. So understand this is a little bit unorthodox of an application. I imagine that this board doesn't routinely hear applications and applicants looking to amend conditions that date back nearly 25 years. So if the board at this time has any questions based upon what I said, I'm happy to address them. And if not, I would ask for permission to call and swear my first witness, only witness.
Are there any questions for the board?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman. First of all, thank you for that transparency. Because we do aim to operate as a municipality with a level of consistency and understanding what the left hand and the right hand is doing, so to speak. So I appreciate that, and thank you for that sensitivity. I want to just make sure that I understand what the belief is in the intention of the action taken nearly 25 years ago. And maybe we'll hear that in the testimony. It was related to it was really related to making sure that there was adequate parking, correct? So at that time in 1999, for that use, the parking requirement was like something in the middle 20s.
It would have been, I think it would have resulted in, based upon both general office and medical use, it resulted in a 23 space requirement. Had it been all medical use, it would have resulted in a 30 space parking requirement. Obviously I wasn't there and I wasn't present before the board that evening. What Dr. McAdam told me today and previously was that he had initially submitted an application where he wanted to utilize the entire building for his chiropractic practice, and he was only showing 10 parking spaces. And the board at that time referred to, and I don't want to testify for my client, but my understanding is that the board said, come back, this is essentially unacceptable given our parking requirements, and things have changed. And
Let me focus for a moment on the change, because we are here in 2024, not in 1999. If there was an application to do a facility like what is there right now, what would the parking requirement be?
If somebody were to submit an application, and just to keep things simple, if somebody was submitting an application with the same premises, same square footage, and they were going to use the building for all medical office purposes, and this is in the joint report, I believe the parking requirement would be 11.1 spaces. So I indicated that it's approximately overparked right now under the current standards by about 13 spaces.
Okay, and maybe this is I'm not sure, maybe this is a question for our planner. I want to make sure I understand, is there going to be more intense need for parking when there's office space, because presumably the office people are there all day, as compared to a medical portion where people are there for, shorter appointments? Is that the rationale?
Medical office generally has a higher parking standard than general office, simply because with turnover of appointments and booking of appointments, there's usually some overlap. So despite people not being there all day, like an office worker would, because there's turnover, kind of like a shopping mall or something like that, there's people coming in and out. So to have a reservation of spaces, that's why the parking standard is generally higher. What happened in 1999 was the parking standard for medical office was significantly higher than it is today. You can look at the joint report, which kind of, answers a lot of the questions you just had. Pages 7, 8, and 8 provide what the parking standards were under Table 2 back in 1999 during the approval. So what was required, what was provided. Table 3 on page 8 provides what would be required today for the medical office and the general office as it exists, as it operates right now, which would be 10.1 spaces. So they're overparked by 14 spaces. And then the paragraph following that, just underneath it, says basically if this were all medical, it would require 11.2 spaces. So it would still be overparked by,
Okay. But I just want to make sure that I also understand the underlying planning purpose. So like a medical office, I understand the revolving people. and the overlap, you know, one person in, one person out. But there's also staff that's going to be there all day.
There's usually staff, there could be shifts of staff, there could be support staff that's there a portion of the day, there could be nursing staff, there could be doctors. Right now, when medical office parking standard was changed, I don't know what point it was changed from what it used to be in the 1999 approval, but it's 4.5 per 1,000 works out to like 1 per 222, whereas general office requirement is 1 per 250. So they're not that far off, really. In today's world, in today's parking standards, for Bridgewater, they're not much different.
I know this is a tough question because we weren't here in 1999. I didn't live here yet. Is it different today because appointments are quicker, or it was just determined that that was far too intensive? Like why do you think that standard has changed so much?
I've actually, and maybe it's because, you know, when my professional career started, I've never seen a parking standard like the one from 1999. It was 1 per 100 square feet of gross floor area plus 4 spaces per doctor. 4 spaces per doctor, which logically doesn't make any sense to me.
People must be camping out all day.
The doctor had 4 cars apparently. So yeah, so it was very, very, very restrictive. And that may have been to be protective. Medical office was popping up like crazy in the early 2000s. You know, local, it was becoming different. It was becoming less concentrated in hospitals. And so maybe there was parking issues with other medical office that spurred that. Maybe it had always been that way. I can only surmise. But whatever happened, an ordinance change was made to make the parking less restrictive. So it must have been an issue in the township for that to have been looked at and been changed to be less restrictive.
The board's probably familiar with the ITE standards with respect to parking. I don't know them by heart, but I would imagine that many municipalities have over time updated their ordinance to be consistent with the ITE standards. Again, I can't tell you what they are for medical office, but that may have been, aside from the concerns of being just blatantly overparked for medical office, but that, you know, there might have been an effort for the township to bring their parking standards in accordance with that.
Thank you.
Let me ask a question, please.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes. Ms. Kathleen, on 11.1 or 12 or whatever it is, does it also consider the ambulance parking for medical offices?
Generally, no. Medical offices, they're talking about generally talking about like a specialist. So, you know, at a foot doctor, at a podiatrist, you need for an ambulance. Ambulatory care is usually for emergencies. Not even an urgent care probably would need ambulatory services, because if you're in an emergency, you're going to a hospital probably. So these are, medical office generally contemplates smaller medical offices, or, you know, not a hospital use, essentially.
Okay.
I have a question.
Mr. Cora?
So I know in this report that I'm reading, I think it's a joint report, it said, it's saying that the applicant is requesting that the planning board consider modifying or eliminating the existing condition in the prior approval, which would allow for the deed restriction to be changed to remove the limitation on medical and dental office space. Are you stating that you're looking to remove it because of parking, or is it for parking issues, or is it or not parking issues, but the amount of spots you have, or is it to remove the condition for to add medical and dental office space?
So the ultimate goal would be to have not be limited to only an office tenant to take over that existing 1,000 square feet. It could be an expansion of Dr. McAdams' chiropractic practice. It could be, as I had stated in the application, a med spa. I'm not exactly sure, and I'll get to it, you know, with the testimony of Dr. McAdam. But what I am representing before the board is that the board imposed a condition on the applicant and essentially said, if you want an approval, you need to record this deed restriction. And the reason why, as Dr. McAdam will testify to, is because they were concerned that if Dr. McAdam expanded his operation, there would be a parking issue on the property. So the board addressed that concern by saying, you need to restrict your property so you can't expand your operation. Now that the ordinance has changed and that there's no longer a parking issue, which again, I can't testify to, but that's what Dr. Adam is going to say. Dr. McAdam is going to say that's why the board imposed that deed restriction. What I'm saying is that it's moot. The rationale for the deed restriction is no longer relevant. There's no longer a parking concern. It's overparked by somewhere between 13 and 14 spaces based upon the existing premises. You know, the board, the planning board, and the zoning board don't lose jurisdiction over the property should they remove the deed restriction. If, you know, there's a concern that, a future property owner, not Dr. McAdam, but if a future property owner might come in and greatly change the property, well, they'll have to go in for site plan approval. They may need to seek relief. My point is the board still has jurisdiction over this in the future should anybody change anything. But ultimately, again, the reason why we're seeking the removal of this deed restriction is to afford Dr. McAdam with the full right to use his property. That's simply it.
Not to reduce the number of parking spaces that are currently there.
There's no, we are not seeking any like site plan changes. You know, it would be maybe down the road if it may make sense for Dr. McAdam to increase the size of his building now that the parking requirements have changed. Today in my office, Dr. McAdam had said that was originally what he wanted to do. He wanted a bigger office, less parking. So I can't speak to what the future holds, but tonight, certainly, absolutely no site changes, no site improvements, nothing of that nature. Purely looking at just the deed restriction and that condition.
And maybe this is more for, do you know of any other reasons why there would be a restriction on medical and dental office space?
I'm trying to think of the whole rationale. I'm thinking that it's because in order to have the entire building be medical office, they would have needed more parking, and they could not comply with the ordinance at that time. So they put the deed restriction on it to make acceptable the amount of parking that they had there. But at this time, they don't need that amount of parking for the size building. So they're just trying to remove the deed restriction because that's the reason it was put there, because they couldn't comply with the parking before.
Got it. And I guess, yeah, that makes sense. Just to ask, is there any other reason why there would be a deed restriction?
I posed the question in the memo because the action or the condition that the board imposed at that time, I think is highly unusual. Generally, parking ordinance is law. If they couldn't comply with it at the time, or they weren't contemplating a full medical office, but maybe in the future wanted to do that, they'd still have to come back before the board. Those protections were still in place. They could have sought a parking variance if they did want to expand it. So the action that was taken by the board, I wasn't there, none of us were there probably, and so it was highly, highly unusual to see a deed restriction. I don't know if I've ever seen something like this where the board imposed something like that. And it has implications, forever. It kind of got that site stuck in time where whatever the 1999 zoning was and the parking requirements, it's kind of, a deed restriction runs with the land. So it's a little bit strange for that reason, because clearly the parking standards have changed and freed up, some of what they were nervous about, but the deed restriction hasn't changed. So that's, what they're requesting tonight. So I posed the question because I wasn't sure if they were aware of anything else besides the parking that we would need to be privy to that may, help us better understand what other impacts the deed restriction was based upon. If it, Mr. Silbert has provided that it was pretty much just the parking. And, I will, take that truth, and I think, it's a good thing to note as we're considering this request. Thank you.
I have one more question to you, Ms. Kathleen. So on the medical offices, obviously there has to be some handicap parking. So is it 12 parking, that 11.1 or 12 parking that you are providing it, that also include handicap parking, obviously doctor's parking, and patient parking? That include everything? Yes. Okay.
We have
spaces are based on the total number of spaces per the ADA requirements.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, one additional question. And again, I don't want to focus on the future, but I don't want to ignore the future.
Sure.
And I just want to validate that whatever alternate, either continuation of use or alternate use on this site would be subject to our parking requirements for whatever that use is under current standards. Okay, so whatever goes there, whether it's permitted and does not require relief or is not permitted and you go down the pathway of seeking relief, we have the protection that the appropriate amount of parking, and then as a subset of that, the appropriate amount of handicap accessible parking would be on that site.
Correct.
Okay.
Thank you, Councilman.
And if any changes to the building or anything in the future were to happen, he would have to come back for a variance if it didn't comply with parking.
Or site plan. Let's say
Yeah.
pre-existing nonconformities on the site related to the impervious coverage, related to, I think, the setback. There was three variances that were physical attributes of the site that were approved. So if those are changed in any way, they'd have to seek additional variances.
And yeah, so that also, like, any exterior changes to the building. So if there's like a tenant fit up or a tenant build out, that's not something we would return to the board with unless the use was in question.
Ms. Fina, I know you have a comment.
Yes, I do. If I can just sort of bring this all together, and I want to reiterate what Attorney Silbert has previously summarized, just to make sure we're all on the same page. The issue solely before this board tonight is whether to grant the request to remove that condition number 6 from the prior approval provided back in 1999. Because of the abundance and transparency, and based upon the information provided by the applicant, many of the issues and I think perhaps concerns of the board would be addressed in a later application. Obviously, that is too premature to discuss and also contemplate for this application. And for this application, I want to make sure the board is aware of the legal authority. Again, Attorney Silbert already set that forth, but it's the negative criteria proofs, and that's whether the removal of the condition will not detrimentally impact the neighbors or offend our zoning code. So that is what I would like the board to keep in mind when listening to the testimony, and that's what should be considered. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Fina. Before I move on, sure, please.
Silbert, just in relation to the deed restriction provision.
Please, Ms. Sarmed, yes.
As I read the deed restriction, I agree it's affirmative. I think what was written in the resolution was somewhat captured. You know, there was pretty much the similar text about general office, not medical, not dental, which may have gotten skewed in the writing of the deed. Just be general office. I think it probably intended to say office except for. Anyway, I was a little bit confused about the provision that said, with the exception of the applicant owner, Kathleen O'Connor LLC, a corporation in the state of New Jersey, or Dr. Bradley J. McAdam, chiropractor, and staff employees, agents, or servants, would that mean, and you may not know the answer, would that mean that if Mr. McAdam sold his practice to a dentist or another chiropractor, or his son inherited or something, that would mean the deed restriction would still be imposed? He would not be able to utilize the medical office?
So I purposely chose not to focus on the text of the deed restriction because I thought, I basically had concerns whether the deed restriction itself, the language was even legal to be put in place. I've never seen a deed restriction like that. I thought it was written in a very strange manner. So that doesn't, I understand what your question is. In terms of this application, let's say that deed restriction was invalid and we'd have to re-record it. It's still, the condition would still hold true. So that's why I wanted to see if I could remove the condition, and then it would become irrelevant whether the deed restriction was actually a valid deed restriction. I tried to research whether, again, I've never seen a deed restriction like that. It usually runs with the land, doesn't run to a LLC or a property owner in that respect. So my antennas and red flags went up too. I chose to focus on the condition.
Okay, I just wanted to make that kind of clear. I did find it overly restrictive, probably similar, a big red flag. But I also wanted the board to ask that question so the board is kind of aware what could be at stake for the property owner and keep that in mind. I had raised a question in the memo about if they sought to remove the deed restriction entirely, or if they were gonna, fit in different, offer other conditions. It doesn't matter to me what it is. I just want to make that clear what their request is.
Yeah, it's definitely the entire removal. If the board came back to us and said that we have XYZ concerns, we think that this part should really stay in place, then it's something obviously I would discuss with Dr. McAdam, but the intent is certainly to remove the entire restriction.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sarwin. Mr. Wisniewski, any comments? Okay. Any members of the public wishing to address the testimony, please feel free.
So it's probably important that I call my witness so that we have a record here, because I spoke a lot and made a lot of representations. I'd like the opportunity to back that up with my witness.
Please bring him forward.
Thank you. You'll be sworn in.
I believe we'll need to swear you in, Mr. McAdam.
Could you raise your right hand? Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Thank you. So why don't you have a seat, and there's a mic here. I think this works here. Thank you. All right, doctor. So if you could just provide the board with an overview of your experience owning and operating your chiropractic practice on the subject property and in Bridgewater Township overall.
Hi, good evening. I moved in to Bridgewater in 1984. I was practicing in the BOC complex, running an office space, and I kind of outgrew the office space, and I was starting to look for a place to build an office or acquire an office, and I was introduced to Bill Strohmeyer, and he says, listen, I got the perfect place for you. It's 794 US 202-206. It's an abandoned house. It's a perfect location. It's on the highway. It's not a very good place to raise a family. And that's when it all started. Being a lay person in this business, we proposed 10 parking spaces at first. They kind of laughed at me and sent me home. And then we had to come back and rework it. And it came down to land use and parking spaces and the size of the building. So the building was built 2,500 square feet approximately. I was able to use 75% of it, keeping the parking lot down to 24 spaces, so the overall land use was not abused. And the driveway was moved closer to the property line because the state wanted that because of the traffic light on the road with Talamini. But
Thank you for that. I think that's helpful, and I think probably perhaps certain board members are familiar with your practice. So I've obviously been to your office before. You've been at that location for approximately 24 years, would you say?
yes,
And you said since 1984, so approximately 40 years total in Bridgewater?
yes.
Wonderful. So I've been to your office before, as I said. So if one were to go to your office, they would see on your walls pictures of Somerset County's athletes. Obviously, we just saw the presentation earlier this evening on the high school. So would one see pictures of Bridgewater High School athletes, Immaculata athletes, Somerville, Watchung, et cetera?
Yes, we really enjoy taking care of the student athletes. We have a service that we render, soft tissue. We have some modalities like cold lasers, shockwave therapy that really help with the injuries that the kids sustain. And it's it's been working out. We still see the general public and all the other computer people who sit too much.
So you touched on this, and I appreciate that background. Just so it's clear, so would you say that the key concern raised by the board during that hearing in 1999 regarding the proposed improvements to the property, what would you say that key concern was?
The parking lot requirement.
Okay.
They sent me home a couple times.
And I'm not sure whether you recall this or not, but you did not receive a unanimous approval, right?
We had one gentleman that was outstanding, but one of the board members or the employees of Bridgewater, I can't remember the gentleman's name, finally stood up and said, listen, you might as well give it to him. He gave you everything you wanted as far as what they were looking for and requirements to the building, the parking lot.
You got, if I said to you, you got 3 affirmative votes, 1 denial, does that ring a bell?
Yes.
Okay. And again, I've already asked you this, but do you remember any of the concerns raised? The man who voted no on your application was Mr. Jones. By any chance, do you remember why he had an issue with your application?
I didn't really understand George Jones's position, so I can't really answer that question. I mean, like I said, the other gentleman stood up and said, listen, you might as well give it to him. He gave you everything you wanted.
All right. So you obviously agreed to a deed restriction on your property, right?
I didn't really understand it because I thought it was, I couldn't use the whole building myself, which meant I couldn't like rent it out to another medical doctor, but it opened it up to whoever else I wanted to rent it to. But I guess there was other wordage in there.
And but is it fair to say you agreed to that restriction because you felt like that was really your best path forward to getting an approval?
Yes.
Okay. And so when I look at the resolution, and I don't know if the whereas clauses are correct or if you have a different recollection of things, but when you agreed to the deed restriction, do you remember agreeing to only use the space for general office, or do you remember agreeing to deed restrict the property to limit medical uses on the property?
Limit the medical use of the property. I couldn't move into this space myself.
Okay, so that was the intention behind the deed restriction.
Yes.
Well, you don't recall agreeing that you would only have office there. You just recall agreeing, I'm sorry, you don't recall agreeing that you would have general office there. You only recall agreeing that you wouldn't have medical office there.
Right. No medical office because I would have to have more parking spaces.
Okay, I appreciate that. So let's talk about your neighbors. I mean, obviously, you look around the room, and I pose this question to you. You don't see any of your neighbors here, right?
No.
And would you say you have a good relationship with your neighbors?
We have a very good relationship. Most of them are patients of ours. Some borrow the parking lot when they have a gathering at their house. So no complaints.
Great. And you had said to me you had the opportunity to speak with one of your neighbors about this. They asked you about the notice they received.
Yeah, they got the notice. They wanted to know what we were doing with the parking lot.
Gotcha. Okay. So overall, in your approximately 25 years at that property, you've never really had an issue with any of your neighbors?
No issues.
Okay. So I want to just shift gears a little bit, and I just have a couple more questions. So obviously, I represented to the board your desire to lease the remaining space in the future to a med spa user, but are there other reasons why this removal of this condition is important to you?
Yes, it's going to be a family-owned business. My son, who's in his early 30s, is the primary chiropractor there now, so he's going to be taking it over, and it's not going to go nowhere.
So is it important for you to ensure that the property is free of any encumbrances or deed restrictions? In other words, can the board infer, irrespective of the possible tenant, that you don't want to leave your son property that is marred in any way, especially unreasonably so?
Yes, I don't want to leave it, with issues.
And obviously, you're not a professional planner, but is it your position that the elimination of this condition will not pose any substantial detriment to your neighbors?
No.
Great. And just a couple more questions, just about the rental history of the property. So can you talk about what that space was used for in the past?
When we first opened up, an Allstate agent rented out the space. He stayed there for 10 years, and then I struggled to find somebody else and finally found a gentleman named Dr. Bob, who is a retired biomedical physicist from J&J. He developed the baby shampoo, whatever. So he was a gentleman that developed different formulas, but he didn't produce it there, he just developed it. He did a nose swipe for COVID, all kinds of really cool things. Then he's turning 90 and he wants to retire. I just don't understand that.
So have you had any success trying to lease it recently for general office space? What kind of tenants have been interested thus far?
Not many. As you look around anywhere, the commercial real estate market is pretty slow.
You mean for office real estate?
Yes.
Okay. So I think that concludes my questions. I think that the board has a decent idea of what transpired at the hearing in 1999, and I would turn it back to the board if the board has any questions. If Dr. McAdam, please.
Thank you, Mr. Silbert. Any questions regarding Mr. McAdam's testimony?
No, Chairman. Actually, I know his office very well. Many of my friends go to his office, so I also travel every day there.
I can hear that.
Right? Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I do have a question.
Mr. Banga.
Dr. McAdam, thank you for your testimony this evening. Can you just help me understand, so right now the lease is for office use only, correct?
I'm sorry?
The space that's being leased right now is mainly for office use. That's how that's how
Yes,
it's
no
written.
residential, just office.
No residential, correct. But you're surrounded by residential on both sides. Is that that's accurate?
Yeah, across the street, there's a haircutting salon, there's a nursery. 2 doors down, there's a mortgage guy. 3 doors down. And 2 doors down, I'm not sure what they're putting in there, but they've been doing a lot of renovations on that building.
Okay.
But,
And then with regards to, and I believe Mr. Silbert, you had kind of mentioned about this med spa. Could you just help me understand how you define that?
she does, from what I understand, like facials and things along that aspect of it, you know, to help women look better.
I've actually
Like a mani-pedi type.
I've had the opportunity to speak with the potential tenant. She has like a licensed doctor that works out of the facility. So I have never been to a med spa before personally. I'm trying to understand what that means.
And she's also licensed also in the state
As a practitioner,
as
as a doctor.
anesthesiology, whatever.
I'm not sure what her license is.
Med spas are typically like Botox and things, injections, you know, work done more than facials. Facials and like if you do a hydrofacial or things like that, you don't need a physician for.
Right.
That's more of a day spa.
Right. What she described as the procedures that she's doing by state law requires a physician present. Unlike,
Like a deeper microdermabrasion,
Yep.
different things like that.
but you know, I don't want to speak for Dr. McAdam, but I haven't heard from that tenant for a number of probably about good 2.5 months, and things obviously are very fluid. So I have to, assuming that this condition is removed, we would have to go back to her and take the proper legal course, whether that's a zoning permit application, if we feel confident that it's something that would work within the underlying zoning, then that's the avenue we would go. If not, then a use variance is always a possibility, which we would obviously go before the zoning board.
And just your overall intent for this other space, not being since you're not able to find a tenant for the office space, is it to kind of keep it within a medical type?
No. Right now, in this day and age, you rent it out to an Allstate agent, to whoever needs, 1,000 square feet of office space. It's got, good location, good parking, handicap accessible, so it's, I don't really see us moving into it because it's, we're busy, but we're not that busy.
Thank you, Mr. Banga. Any other questions?
Maybe you can help us out here. We have this requirement of 4 parking spaces for a physician, for a doctor. And I may be intrusive here, but I'm thinking, okay, you have a receptionist, maybe an assistant, yourself, maybe a technician comes in once in a while to calibrate machines, which could come up with the 4 spaces per doctor. Do you feel that the 4 spaces is yes, no, maybe?
With the other 17, there's plenty of parking in there. We don't have a technician that comes in, really. If anybody's going to come in and work on So, yeah, with the 4 spaces, with 24 parking spaces is a lot. We don't fill it up, even with the tenant that's occupying the rental.
And again, I may be a little bit intrusive here and stepping overboard, but how often do patients come through your office? I mean, how long do they stay there? 15 minutes, a half an hour, hour? I
20,
don't know if I can ask that.
hour, something like that.
Because I sense, and again, I may be stepping out here, is that the insurance companies may be suggesting how long a physician can stay and see a patient. And that you have to see, not you, but physicians in general seeing 4 per hour, which is quite a bit of a turnover. Maybe a few years ago, 25 years ago, it was 20 minutes instead of 15 minutes, so they saw 3 an hour. So I'm just trying to get a handle on the turnover of vehicles in and out, if you can understand what I'm trying to do.
I would imagine that we see probably 8 every 30 minutes, maybe 6 every 30 minutes.
Okay. Okay, it gives me an idea, it gives me an understanding. Okay.
I mean, you would always want to see 10 every 15 minutes, but that doesn't work that way.
Now, granted, that part of the highway has changed since 1999. You go down the road there, and there are other physicians, other medical offices
Yeah.
on that road, much larger, and I imagine a lot more turnover.
Yeah, I don't know if I would want to raise a family on that road. It's a very busy road.
Yeah. And I see your drawings here are 25 years old, and you use the old spelling of Talamini, because we couldn't figure out how to spell it back then.
Thank you, Mr. McGraw.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, just a question, because I'm really trying to understand what the mindset was in 1999. And my reason for that is that 25 years from tonight, not tonight, but 25 years from now, something that we've done on this dais could be questioned. And people can say, what was the rationale? Not on this case, maybe on a different case. What was there? And I'm going to say, I hope to be alive 25 years from now. I don't expect to be sitting on this dais. Maybe a few who are here will. I don't know. So that's the reason why I think there's so much focus on trying to understand the rationale, because we don't take lightly undoing an action from 25 years ago. We want to be fair to the applicant. We want to be reflective of the modern needs and modern planning. But I think the reason why we're diving into this as much as we are is to really respect the process and the possibility that 25 years from now, some action that we're taking, hopefully the individuals here would do the same. So looking through that lens particularly, right now you're overbanked in your parking, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
The requirements. I mean, I can't believe they changed the requirements the way they did. They cut it in half, if not more.
Okay. So other than the fact that it would be expensive, you could take out parking spaces tomorrow and still be compliant.
Yeah, that'd be expensive.
Okay. But that's really the only thing.
Asphalt is very expensive now.
Right. Well, removing asphalt. Right. Okay. All right. That was my question.
Thank you, Councilman. Any other comments from the board?
I'll say I have been to Dr. McAdams' office in the past, and I don't recall it ever being busy, but I don't know if it's just because there was an abundance of parking. I felt like I was always the only one there, even though I probably wasn't. So I will just say that being there as a patient, you're not in need of parking. You know, there's always plenty of parking. So just to state that.
How about our professionals? Ms. Sarman?
Thank you. I apologize to the applicant and to the board for the long discussion about the future use. I think, just from the application from Mr. Silbert, including some other documentation to that, I just wanted to make it clear, I did not know if that was being proposed or not, or if that was seen as a permitted use. So I just wanted to make that clear, that I raised a question about, if it was a permitted use or not, and the jurisdiction of a medical spa, but we're going to get to that at a later date, so that's not something for consideration. What I did want to talk about was the R40A zone. I did actually speak with Scarlett Doyle, the previous planner, just about, this application, just getting, up to speed about the zoning. And what I found curious about the prior approval, and I think Mr. Silbert kind of alluded to it, was that the board was willing to approve variance conditions for impervious coverage. They were willing to permit to move the driveway and create a condition at the driveway. The lot was undersized. And I think the biggest one is that there is a specific provision in the R40A zone for it says under M, contiguous development. Office developments constructed under this section shall be contiguous to any existing or approved office development so that no single-family dwelling will be isolated as a result of new office development under this section. And they received variance relief from that, where this used to be a single-family home and basically it was converted entirely to office. So they were willing to make those concessions, basically against a deed restriction because of the parking. And so I don't take that lightly. The board was willing to grant variance relief. They were very, very, very concerned about the parking, it seems, if they were, imposing that condition in exchange. The parking has changed. As I mentioned before, it's incredibly unusual that that's the path that they took to protect the site from a parking variance in the future, which they would have had purview over anyway. Regardless of that, I think that all that variance relief has already been, it's in the past. It's something that it's not being changed. It's not being requested to be changed. Simply, I think you've heard the full request now from Mr. Silbert from a legal perspective. You've heard it from the applicant himself, who has occupied that property with his business for over 20 years. And I don't think we've had any, zoning complaints. There hasn't been any traffic complaints. There hasn't been any safety issues. There haven't been any parking issues. And so, I'm always wary, as Mr. Kirsch said, I'm always wary about judging a decision from the past and, wondering why they did something and wondering if that's going to happen to us in the future. But because of how unusual the deed restriction was, I really do think that it warrants a look from this board, warrants a consideration from this board to either extinguish it or amend it in some way that you feel comfortable. I'd offered that in my memo simply because I wasn't sure if the previous deed restriction was only related to the parking. If there were other considerations made by the board at the time of the previous approval, I wanted to make sure that those were protected, that the deed restriction continued to protect those, and maybe that it be amended in some way. But I think the most simple move forward is exactly what's being requested, is the deed restriction be extinguished, so that this property isn't so unusually encumbered. And That's just my professional recommendation to this board.
I'm sorry, can I just follow up? Because I know I asked you this before, but I think it's very important just to reiterate it as a follow-up to what you just said. We as a township have the continued protection of current standards for parking on this and every other facility, every other property, that in order to get a building permit or go before a board if you need to, you will need to follow the current parking standard.
Correct.
Okay.
And the current zoning standard for permitted uses as well protects this site from, anything outside the purview of what the permitted uses are in the R40A zone. So those protections.
And the reason I ask that is, I want to make sure that we don't have a law of unintended consequence here. The request seems pretty straightforward. I just want to make sure that, we are potentially going to grant what we want to grant and not, open up a crazy can of worms for what some future circumstance may be. That would essentially be our protection against some unintended consequences, existing land use law, existing procedures, existing standards.
Correct. And that's the exercise that was undertaken in the review memo on pages 7 and 8, in tables 2 and 3, was intended to show the change in parking so we can better understand the hypotheticals. It only goes through, the current conditions, the medical office and general office, and then also medical and medical. But if there is a parking standard, I'm not intimately familiar with the parking standards for Bridgewater yet, that I could tell you off my head if there is a more restrictive one. But if there is a more restrictive one, and they offer that use in the other tenant spot, and it generates a requirement higher than the parking that exists on the property, they would have to be before the board for a parking variance. So,
But it would seem that because you're so overbanked now, the likelihood that anything would come into that facility to trigger a parking problem seems to be pretty low.
yeah, I'm fairly confident that there's not there's not a higher standard. There's not many uses that have a higher standard than 1 per 250. There might be some 1 per 100 or something, but there's probably not.
Without an expansion, like a vertical expansion of the building, then you'd be triggering.
Okay.
And then you'd be maybe triggering an additional need for parking if you were to go up a floor to expand the offices. But other than that, I believe Mr. Silbert also spoke to that, and Councilman Kirsch, you did as well, that any use that goes in there will have to file a zoning permit. That zoning permit application process will trigger the need for the review of the parking conditions on the site, and then this whole process can begin again if needed.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, can I ask one more clarification question to Ms. Kathleen, please? So considering that all 2,500 square feet of Dr. McAdam property will be filled up with the medical offices, spa or medical offices, whatever it is, what will be the maximum parking lot requirement with the current standard?
So if the entirety of the building was occupied by medical office, the parking requirement would, under the current ratios of medical office, 4.5 spaces per 1,000 square feet, would be 11.2 spaces.
Same as before then, okay,
And
thank
there
you.
are 24 existing spaces.
Okay, good, thank you.
But if it were something else, say it's a day spa, because we were just talking about that, not a medi spa, what would that change it to?
That would probably fall under health and well-being uses, which would be 4 per 1,000, which is less than medical.
Yeah.
Medical's 4.5 per 1,000. 4 per 1,000 is actually just 1 per 250.
Okay.
So it's the same as general office actually right now, I think, or close to it.
One of the reasons why I included all those definitions is because when you look up like chiropractic use in 2024, you can put that use in so many different categories. So the board back in 1999, and I would imagine the ordinance reflected that, chiropractic use, plain and simple, that was a medical office use. 2024, Bridgewater Township puts that type of use in multiple categories, which it's, again, not something I found fascinating, maybe a little bit confusing trying to determine what the parking requirements would be today. But that's one of the reasons why I had all those uses in my application. Putting aside the med spa use was just to kind of show that, you can put chiropractic use in health and well-being use also, or wellness center. So.
Any other comments? Any comments from our members of the public? Seeing none, I'd like to close the public portion of the meeting. Ms. Fina, have we satisfied all conditions and requests?
My only question was, Dr. McAdams, your only witness.
He was. I do not have a planner.
I just wanted to verify. I don't know if this time Attorney Silbert wants to provide closing remarks.
I think I don't think that there's any further remarks that need to be made. I think that the board is focusing essentially on whether the removal of this condition poses a substantial detriment to the neighboring properties and the overall community. And I'd ask that the board consider the testimony that the board heard, but also look around the room. And I think that speaks volumes. The fact that there really was nobody that felt inclined to object to this application.
Thank you, Mr. Silbert. Okay, I'd like to close this portion of the meeting and open it up for deliberations. Mr. Magora.
Well, I think we have a unique deed restriction here, which I don't quite understand, but there it is. And if there is a reduction in parking spaces and removal of the impervious surface, that would decrease the surface water runoff, which would be desirable. So, and just in general, you're overloaded with parking spots. So I would agree that somehow we remove that restriction and approve this application.
Mr. Wang.
Thank you. I think for 25 years, the restriction is, I can't understand this. For 25 years, only one parking space less, right? Is limited the use of the property, and to me, I can't believe this. And under the current township ordinance, I think this restriction should be removed. Thank you.
Ms. Sikora.
Yeah, I mean, I understand overparked by way of what the current ordinances are. There's just a little bit, I have a hard time understanding why that was the only thing that blocked you from the other piece, and I didn't see much notes through the 1999 meeting minutes. So, if it were about the parking or the ability to use the extra space, I'm in agreement with both. If there's anything underlying that we don't know, I'd appreciate knowing.
Mr. Banga.
Yeah, very unique restriction. Like my colleagues trying to understand why it was so restrictive in the first place, but based on our current ordinance, I see no. We should, it should be lifted.
Mr. Atkins.
I think what we have here is a very successful family Bridgewater business. I think a lot of us like to see. Sorry about that. I do believe that the requirements imposed on you were a bit erroneous, so I think it is really beneficial to bring it up to date.
Ms. Chartowitz.
Yeah, I don't see any detriment to the surrounding properties by removing the restriction. I think as long as we're, in compliance with the current ordinance, which we are, I don't see a reason to keep that deed restriction. So I would be in favor of removing it.
Mr. Chowdhury?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. So based on purely expert knowledge and testimony, and also the current conditions, I think we should definitely revoke the restrictions. Plus, we know them very well. At least I personally know. They may not know it, but we know them very well. All our the friends and everybody, they are very happy with his business. We like to continue it at least. Thank you.
Councilman Kirsch?
Yeah, I think I largely made my statement before. The importance of respecting the past, trying to understand what was done, why it was done. Seems to me that you walked away from the planning board 25 years ago with a sufficient solution at the time, a solution that's allowed you to be successful for 25 years. Obviously, we're sitting here today in 2024, and we need to apply today's standards. So I think that removal of that condition doesn't disrespect the past, but I think it acknowledges the current and then presumably future needs for this property. So I'm comfortable supporting the relief and hopeful that it allows whomever utilizes this property to have 25 years or more of prosperity as you have. I think to echo what was said on the dais, it's a great Bridgewater story. I hope there are more of these where with the assistance of our municipal government, we can allow people to be successful, especially if it's in one place for a generation.
Yeah.
Or more.
Difficult to echo the rest of the sentiments here. Mr. Silbert, I thank you for walking us through that introduction, because it provided us with a historical background and some legal background that we needed. The board needed perspective on this. There's no way that the board could have done its job without that perspective. Understanding 25 years ago in relation to today, it's a different story. This is a unique deed restriction situation. I don't think that, from what we've understood through this testimony, if there's any precedent being set, I would be in support of lifting this deed restriction as well.
Thank you.
With that, I'd like to ask for a motion.
I'll make a motion.
That's Ms. Sikora.
I'll second.
And just for clarity on what that motion is.
If that could be that motion to approve with all conditions being met.
So, for my purposes, a motion to grant the application for an amendment to eliminate condition number 6 of the prior approval and grant the request to remove the deed restrictions, all conditions being met.
Yes, thank you. Yeah.
Thank you.
That's Ms. Sikora. And the second?
Ms. Chartowich?
Ms. Chartowitz? I'll take a second from another board member, please.
I'll second.
That's Mr. Atkins. Could I have a roll call, please? Yes.
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 Thank you and congratulations.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
We'll see you in 25 years.
Yeah.
There you go.
Don't blame us after 24 years.
Good night.
Maybe we'll just see the attorney in 25 years.
There you go. Okay, moving along. There is no other board business. I do have a question for Ms. Probst. What are the upcoming dates, if you have that handy?
2nd of April, I think.
Mm-hmm. Okay. 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 Nothing in May, okay.
Just saying, the second is the week of spring break. So like, I know I think you said here, I'm away during that time too, so just as a heads up.
I think we should do an informal poll. Yes, yes. For the date of April 2nd, starting from this side.
April 2nd, I'm here.
Should be here, yeah.
I will be absent.
Should be here.
I'll be absent.
Should be here.
Unless I'm invited on one of these trips, I'll be here.
I plan to be here.
I'm not sure. It's spring break. Yeah, but most likely I'm here.
Okay. And if there are any changes in those statuses, just please feel free to email Nancy. The second reason why I ask, so there's only one application on each of those 2 nights, correct? Okay. Many of you are familiar with the fact that the township is working on a master plan process for quite a while. And it's something that's nearing its final stages. And we're looking for the board, especially since there's so many new members on this board within the last few years and this year alone, we're looking to catch the board up a bit on what's taken place and where we stand. Ms. Sarmat, perhaps we could give the board a brief understanding of what we'd look to accomplish at one of these meetings.
So currently there's an ad hoc subcommittee for the master planning process. And I think, as this process moves forward, there's going to be upcoming workshop meetings open to the public to get feedback in April. And so I think on the night of the 2nd, I'd like to provide an overview, kind of a brief update to where we're at in the process, kind of some of the steps forward, answer any questions, even just in general about what is master planning, what's a master plan look like. And then also just, kind of put a PSA out there that there is an upcoming workshop that we'd like, if anyone can attend, especially from this board, and if anyone from the public is here during that night, to invite them so they're aware of it as well. So maybe we have Nancy put it on the agenda as another business item so that we can have a placeholder for that discussion.
Okay. And that date should be April 11th, from what I understand, for that
The
workshop?
workshop is supposed to be Wednesday, April 11th, so it's the following. So if we do meet on the 2nd, I think it would be very, very helpful to kind of put that out there on the 2nd so that everyone is aware in advance of the 11th.
Okay.
And just for clarity, because I'm more familiar with the requirements of the Open Public Meetings Law on council than necessarily for land use. If we are all invited to that April 11th meeting, or we're not invited to it?
We'll have to see.
So the way I do understand, one of 2 things would need to occur. Either it would need to be advertised as a public meeting, which would permit us, more than half of us, to attend, or we would have to make sure that no more than half of us attend. So do I understand the principle correct?
It has to be advertised as a public meeting, or you can't have a quorum, so yes.
Okay. So I guess my question is, do we want to advertise April 11th to leave open the possibility that more than half of us could be in that room? Okay. And my only, because,
I think notice is going out tomorrow.
okay, because we're a 9-member board with 2 alternates, correct? So that's an 11-member board, but 5 of us make a quorum. And I, I would hate to be the 5th person interested in being there and being told, sorry, you can't be in the room right now.
As far as, and to follow up what Nancy said, as far as I'm concerned, it will be a publicly noticed meeting. I will double check that as well on my end, and make sure. And we'll know on the 2nd, we'll be able to say with confidence, if it is an advertised meeting, which would allow all the members.
So your intention essentially is to workshop with all of us in public, or pre-workshop with all of us on the 2nd to bring us up to speed.
Yeah.
And then that will open.
Presentation on it.
Okay, and then that will open up the door for those of us who are available and interested, very likely more than 4 of us, to be in the room on the 11th, subject to the proper notice being given.
Yes, and I'll talk more details about what the 11th is going to entail. It's going to be much less of a presentation, definitely more of an involved, feedback process. So what I intend to talk about more on the 2nd is kind of like the background, where we're at, steps forward, so that this board is aware, because a planning board is the sole responsible entity for master plan adoption. The responsibility lies solely with the planning board. It's not a council, it's not a governing body document, it's a planning board document. It's not a zoning board document, it's a planning board document. So I think as much as we can make this board aware of what's going on, I think, and getting feedback from, the very involved board members would be helpful.
Thank you, Ms. Sarman. I think it would be wise for this purpose. Yeah.
So we may have a brief meeting on the 2nd.
Any other comments? That being said, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
Motion?
That's Ms. Chartowitz. Ms. Chartowitz with the motion to adjourn. And I'll take a second. That's Mr. Banga. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Thank you very much, everyone.